You're watching Teaching the Business of Being a GP, produced by GP Supervision Australia and presented by Leonie Chamberlain. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which this recording was produced and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, future, and their families.
I will introduce myself. I work at GPSA as the Chief Operations Officer. I am on the board of GPSA and I work at Blackburn Clinic. I've been there for 23 years now and I come from an accounting background. So I was working at KPMG when I was offered to work on Blackburn Clinic as a client, and I really liked them. It was close to home, so I put together a proposal and suggested that they might like me to be there permanently rather than just a couple of days a month. So 23 years later, here we are. Great people to work for, great working environment, and absolutely no reason for me to leave anytime soon. So hopefully they feel the same way. So our learning objectives are not to teach the registrars how to run a general practice, but it's how to teach them how to be an independent medical practitioner. The supervisors, you and the MEs, put so much time and effort to ensure that we've got clinically sound and safe GPs to look after our community. But if they can't be sustainable financially, then we're in trouble as a community, and they definitely as individuals are in trouble. So the goal is to ensure that you understand some of the challenges and the uncertainties that they may be facing as they move from an employee to a self-employed model, to recognise the importance of having trusted advisors, and I will hammer on about that one, identify some of the pitfalls that can happen financially, and hopefully to teach you something that perhaps they're not aware of or haven't thought about for themselves. The first thing when I'm talking to registrars that I like to go through is just the different type of business models that there are in general practice. Gone are the days where we had a couple of partners who would set up a practice in a house in their local community and work 7 days a week, do all the on-calls, evenings, house calls, and so forth. Things have changed a lot. And so it's really important for our registrars that they understand the different types of business models and where they work and why some will work in one location better than another. Registrars, as we know, there's a diversity of practice requirement, which means that they need to have been in at least 2 practices throughout their training, but they may not have had a diversity across different billing types or community settings. So just making them aware that there are options out there that may be different to what they've already explored. So a community health setting obviously will be a bulk billed, generally no out-of-pocket expense for the patient, but very much focused on the needs of that community. And it may be a university setting, it may be an Aboriginal health service, really focusing on the needs of their community and ensuring that they're providing a wealth of care rather than just perhaps one type of care. So often you'll find allied health practitioners attached to something like a community health setting. Bulk billing clinics, be very interesting to see whether or not the numbers increase or decrease or remain stable as a result of the funding arrangements that will be coming in soon. But as the name suggests, a bulk billing clinic, there's no out-of-pocket expenses for the patient. And for some registrars, they may not have experienced working in a bulk billing clinic. When we have a registrar at our practice who's come from a bulk billing clinic, I pick their brains very, very deeply because they have a wealth of knowledge that perhaps some people in a mixed or private billing clinic don't have in relation to time management skills are wonderful, but also the depth of the MBS knowledge in a bulk billing clinic can be a little bit deeper than in a mixed or private billing clinic, where you can become a little bit complacent if you know that you're, perhaps getting $100 for an item 23 or $80 for an item 23. So you don't need to be aware of the other item numbers that might be available. I think it's also important for the registrars to know that it's not a one-size-fits-all. Not every practice will do as well in one area as the next practice might. And I'm talking about things like putting a bulk billing clinic in an area of, say, high socioeconomic demographic. People can be a little bit snobby Perceptions can be everything for some people. And so perhaps a bulk billing clinic in an area where the people can afford to pay out of pocket won't do as well as practice that does charge an out-of-pocket fee. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the quality of medicine being provided. It is just the perception that sometimes the more you pay for something, the better quality or better value it is. Conversely, if you put a private billing clinic in an area where there's a lower socioeconomic demographic, it won't do as well because the patient simply may not have the money to be able to pay that out-of-pocket expense. So it's important that our registrars understand that it's not only the quality of medicine or the type of medicine that's being provided, but there's other factors that can impact on the sustainability of a practice. Community health centres, obviously, they really are focusing on the needs of their community. My university, which I went to many, many years ago, Swinburne, used to be predominantly general practitioners with some allied health. That actually changed over time, and the number of psychologists outnumbered the number of general practitioners because that's what they identified that their community needed. So community health will really focus on the needs of their community and change their model if necessary to meet those needs. Practice ownership is really important too. For the registrars, once again, the diversity of practice may have seen them experience different models, but they may not have. They may have been only within the corporate environment or only within a private environment. And so it's really important for them to be aware of the different types of practice ownership and how that may impact on the way the business is run. I work in a practice that's owned and run by 7 GPs who all work within the practice, and that has a really different feel than if you may have absentee owners. I find that, if our computers are crashing all the time and we need a new server, because it impacts on the day-to-day working environment of those practice principals, they're probably more likely to understand the need and the urgency of buying a new server, even though it may cost tens of thousands of dollars, than someone who is an absentee owner. I know from experience during the pandemic in Melbourne, when things changed every day, I really would have loved to have had the backup of a big corporate organisation behind me to help us just write the new policies that we were doing every single day, and we might finish them at 10 o'clock one night, and by 7 o'clock the next morning we were ripping them up because things had changed, situations had changed, contacts had changed. So, had we have had the backup of a corporate owner behind us, there would have been somebody potentially in head office doing all of those sorts of things for us. So practices will operate differently depending upon their ownership. And as I've touched on, community owners are focusing on the needs of their community. So when I talk about general practice, I talk about it as a business because it is a business. There's different layers of the business. There's the actual business of running the facility and providing the services and the facilities to the GPs. And there's also the business of being a general practitioner. And I think that it's really important for our newly fellowed GPs to understand the needs of the business that's providing them with their services. So within general practice, reputation and goodwill, so difficult to build and so easy to have it ripped out from underneath you, especially now that we've got the keyboard warriors who can sit at home and say whatever they like, put it up on Google anonymously, and it's really difficult to get it down. We had an amazing post on Google just last week or the week before, and it was a 1-star review with one line: "I will never take my dog to that clinic ever again." Fortunately for us, we were able to get in contact with the person who put it up and asked her if she meant Blackburn Clinic or if she meant the vet clinic down the road. So fortunately, we were able to get that one down. But had we not been able to contact that person, we were stuck with a 1-star review. So it's those sorts of things can make or break you, especially when people are searching, they see those stars and don't necessarily look at the reasons behind it. Obviously, within our business, our staff are just so important. I always say that the most important person in our practice is the cleaner, because nobody wants to come to work and work in a dirty environment. But obviously, as you'll all be aware, the value of a great reception team, the value of, really supportive, wonderfully trained nurses can make or break you as a general practitioner. So we invest a lot of time and effort to making sure that we've got the right people around us. And I think that that's really important. I would say that general practice receptionists are unsung heroes, probably one of the hardest jobs I've ever seen performed, and probably one of the most undervalued and often, unfortunately, disrespected group of people. I had a 20-year-old girl in tears last week because a patient had forgotten his appointment and didn't understand why he couldn't have a telehealth there and then. And I wouldn't like to be a medical receptionist either. I think that they do an amazing job. So it's really important for the doctors, the new fellows or the registrars, understand just how important those people are in our practices. Consulting rooms. This is one where people perhaps sometimes misunderstand what I'm talking about here. When I talk about a business asset as far as a consulting room goes, I'm not actually talking about the bricks and mortar, the plaster walls. I'm talking about the utilisation of a consulting room. As a general practice, if there's not bums on seats, then patients aren't being seen and so money's not being made. So for our registrars and new fellows to understand the importance of room utilisation and how that works within the bigger picture, it's really, really important. And so, the 10 till 2 hours might be what everybody wants to work, but explaining to them why that doesn't work from a business perspective can be challenging, but it's an important concept for them to grasp. And accreditation status. Registrars have to be in an accredited practice, so they don't know the difference. They don't understand perhaps what accreditation is. They may have seen some very harried and stressed people on the day of an accreditation visit or the days leading up to an accreditation visit, but understanding that if a practice is accredited, that there's a certain bar that's been passed. There's an investment in time and money and resources to get that accreditation, but also that there's standards there that have to be met that may not be met in an unaccredited practice. I certainly don't want to imply that a non-accredited practice isn't a good place to work. There's some practices that can't achieve accreditation because of the type of medicine that they're providing that may not be the breadth of practice that the accreditation requires. They may be only seeing a particular gender or only a particular type, practicing a particular type of general practice. But it's important for the registrars to understand the differences. And I would always suggest that when a younger doctor, and when I say younger, I'm talking about in experience, not in age, because I know that there's plenty of registrars who come into the practice a little bit, more mature and having more experience in the hospitals. But I would always suggest to them that they either go to an accredited practice or ask the question as to why has practice not become accredited. As I said, there's often very good reasons for that, but it's important that they be aware of it.
You're talking about registrars coming along to practice meetings to hear, from reception and understanding the running of the practice, which I think is a really important aspect of their learning.
I agree. Yeah, I would love for some of our phone calls to actually for anybody to be able to hear both sides of it and not just the receptionist side. I think it'd be wonderful if we could record some of those so that people understand exactly what it is that the receptionists go through. What are the advantages and disadvantages of being accredited versus non-accredited? I would say that the advantages are financial and also from a business succession planning, as well as that quality assurance. If you're not accredited, you are not eligible for a number of government incentives, including PIP payments. You cannot apply for certain grants and you cannot have registrars in your practice. So there's some of the most obvious reasons. I think the quality assurance, though, is also very important. Interestingly, though, the public, I don't believe, really understand what that accreditation status symbol says or what it means in our window. The PIP and the WIP are significant. It is tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And I think it can be the difference between being profitable and just breaking even. And so these are the things that are facing the registrars as they move into fellowship. And it's the practical things that they may not be aware of. or if they're aware of that, they need to get their head around what it means for them. So if you're self-employed, your PAYG is not being withheld by anybody else. You have to manage your own tax obligations with the ATO. You don't get paid annual leave or personal leave. You may be eligible for Commonwealth maternity leave. That's dependent upon eligibility requirements. But if you're self-employed, you do get to set your own hours, you do get to set your own fees, and you don't actually have that same control as an employee. A couple of interesting things, though, that are from an insurance perspective. If you're self-employed, unless you employ yourself through a corporate vehicle, you're not covered by work cover, and no one's paying you super for you. So they're things that people, as they're moving on, just need to get their head around, that there will be some changes for them. Some they may see as a positive and others they may see as a negative. But overall, they're things that are manageable if you're aware of them. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's a lack of awareness of the changes that gets some people caught. So we were talking a little bit about how can we teach the need to be aware of costs, and what is it that a service fee actually does cover. So this one is in relation to when a registrar is looking at a new practice and they're considering, do they go to, say, A or B, because the registrars are in high demand as they fellow, and they, sometimes the ball is in their court. And one of the things that they do focus on is the percentage. And it does my head in, because it's like when they finish high school. It doesn't matter if you got 95 or if you got 70, as long as you got into the course that you wanted. So comparing service fees can really do a doctor a disservice, because it's only one part of an equation, and also you get what you pay for in many situations. And this is one that I would say is definitely you get what you pay for. So if you're paying a higher service fee, then you would hope that you're getting higher quality of service, and things that are really important for doctors to happen behind the scenes so they don't have to worry about it. Things like, are batches being sent off to Medicare regularly? Are the debtors under control? Is someone watching to see that people aren't walking out without paying? Do you have a car park provided? That might not be a big deal for some people, but if you work in the CPD, having a car park provided might be the difference between going to work in comfort or perhaps jumping on a train that you're not really keen on. The consumables. Are the consumables included in the service fee, or are they an add-on? And that can be a really big deal. If you're doing a lot of procedures and the service fees includes your consumables, then you basically know what you're paying. But if someone's actually going through a cupboard at the end of the day to say you used A, B, C, D, and E, and guess what? You opened that box, but you didn't use it, but you're still going to be charged for it, then that will make a difference to your take home. I think it's really important that there's an understanding that if you have nurses helping you out with your chronic disease management, visiting your patients to do health assessments and collect the data, that makes your time much more efficiently used. You can bill more, and so therefore you might be paying a higher service fee. Big one for me, a big tick, is it a teaching practice? We know that there's no money in supervision. We know that we are not making millions of dollars by having med students and registrars in our practice. What we're getting by having registrars and medical students in our practice is not only breaths of fresh air, younger people coming in to teach us new things, it's succession planning for our practice. Of the 7 practice principals where I work, 4 of them have come through as registrars since I've been there. So, they came through as GPT-1s, nervous, unsure of what they were doing, and they're now my bosses. That's a wonderful place for me to work. And I think that for any newly fellowed doctor, working in a teaching practice is really important, because you don't want to be in a 12 square metre room and feel uncomfortable about knocking on the door or lifting the phone and saying, hey, can you come and have a look at this? Because I'm not quite sure. As we know, that's what happens in a teaching practice. So I think it's really important that they consider that when they're looking at service fees. Obviously, the quality of the IT, the hardware and the software, if you crash every day and the server needs to be rebooted, that'll make you run behind. No one likes doctors running behind. especially the doctors. So those sorts of things, I think it's really important that we make the registrars aware of. These are the things you look at. Don't just focus on the number because the number means something. Another example of why focusing on the percentage can really do you a disservice, or do the registrars a disservice, as they're looking for their, perhaps, their next practice or what might be their forever practice, is that numerically it's only one part of an equation. I actually put this slide into this presentation when I was doing this for the registrars a number of years ago, because I thought that it was quite powerful when I was trying to use the words and explain the difference, a percentage only being one part of the equation and the other side is the fees. They all looked at me blankly. But I think that this slide is really powerful because it shows that a higher percentage in service fee doesn't mean a lower take-home pay. It's a percentage of something, and so it's very important that we look at the item numbers and then that average fee per patient to determine whether or not a higher percentage means a lower take-home pay or not. And so this one, I think, is probably the most basic slide I've ever produced, but I think it's also one of the most powerful. How do we try to explain to the newly fellow doctors that we do need them to fulfill our rooms? We need them to be utilising the consult rooms effectively. Otherwise, we basically go out of business. And I think that it's a really good point to touch on, because society now is all about work-life balance, and I have no issue with that at all. I'm really looking forward to seeing our 26-year-old son again. He's been up in his room for about 5 years. He will have finished his law studies very soon, and I'm looking forward to meeting that young man again, because I haven't spent a lot of time with him for quite some time. So I'll be talking to him about work-life balance as well. But we do need to be able to ensure that our business stays open, is profitable, and is able to provide a livelihood not only for the staff but also the GPs that consult from there. And I think letting the newly fellow GP know what's important for us from a business perspective and try and have a win-win situation is really important. So we know when our patients want to come in to see the doctor, and it's not always between 10 and 2 or 9:30 and 3. I've got 5 GPs who start consulting at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they're all fully booked between 7 and 8. That's when the patients want to come. So I think what is really important is highlighting what the needs of the patients are, and then encouraging the registrar to come to some sort of arrangement where it is win-win. And it might be that there's a practice that they really want to work at. They've either trained there or they have heard great things about it, maybe somewhere where they've been a patient in the past and they really like the style there, they like the culture and the way things feel there. So sometimes you do have to take a little bit of a hit, or they have to take a little bit of a hit, and it might be that, okay, you might be working 2 till 7 to get your foot in the door because that's when the room is available. But once you've got your foot in the door, then they have the opportunity, perhaps, as things change, people retire, people may have children, to get something that works best for them. If you have a doctor who specifically only wants to work certain hours, I would suggest that that's a time that you need to look at an individual service fee for them. So if you have a GP and you really like them, they really like you, but they want to work hours that leaves a consulting room empty for either, it might be part of the day, or it may be that they want to take 10 weeks off in a year. And so you're left with a consult room that's empty for that period of time. Then that's when you can look at it, differentiating the service fee and say, okay, well, we can accommodate you with that, but the practice is going to lose this much income as a result, or there's, an opportunity cost there. So the service fee may need to be higher for when you are here. So looking at different ways of making it work for both parties, I think, is really important. Most doctors tell you at interview that they're going into GP practice to work family hours or school hours. Yeah, you're right. A lot of them do. But I think that we would all go broke and there'd be a lot of patients who are unable to be seen because those hours don't work for them. So I think that it's really important that the doctors coming through understand that they are building their own business. It's not a matter of just going in, sitting down, turning on your computer, and the patients will come. There still is choice. And, if a GP decides that they want to work those school hours, that's fine if they can get a place that will accommodate that. But they will miss out on a certain number of the patients. There'll be patients who are school teachers. They can't come to the doctor during those hours. There will be some people who perhaps still are working out of on-site. Not everybody has the flexibility to be able to nick out in their lunch break to go to the GP. So it is important for the newly fellow doctor to understand that they are building their business, and it is as a sole trader. And so it is up to them to attract patients as well. And if they reduce the hours that they're available, they are going to be reducing their customer base. Location. Not as big a deal, I suppose, for those of us who are in a metropolitan area, but for those who may be living more rurally, I think it's really important for our newly fellow doctors to understand that working close to home is not always a wonderful thing. What you make up for in having a short commute, there might be the downside that you bump into your patients either at the gym or the swimming pool or at the supermarket. And so those sorts of things are important to take into account. But it's also really important that they understand that driving an extra half hour each way, each day, for a 0.5% less in a service fee is really poor maths as well, and poor work-life balance. So I think that understanding how well your registrars are able to maintain boundaries is a really good thing as you perhaps start to give them some advice on, what location would be good for them. If it's something that they're going to struggle with, then perhaps working in the suburb that they live in is not wonderful. If they're going to be really straight down the line and they can get a practice that's, 5 minutes from home, like I do, fantastic. I have to be really careful at work. I grew up in Blackburn. I went to Blackburn High. My kids went to Blackburn Primary. I walk into the waiting room every day and I have to just walk and look straight ahead, because invariably there will be a neighbour or a school parent or someone who I went to school with in the waiting room. And, I've learned that I just wait for them to acknowledge me. It's not for me to acknowledge them, because, that's their privacy. Some people don't mind seeing the patients down the street, but I think sometimes it's the patients who perhaps make you uncomfortable when they come up to you and, ask you, are the results in yet? Or do you mind having a look at this quickly for me now while I'm here, because I couldn't get an appointment with you until next week and I'm really worried about it. So I think that just helping the registrars be aware that there's good and bad, and for them to be self-aware of what's going to work for them is really important. Insurance. For some people, insurance is a dirty word. For me, insurance lets me sleep at night. And I think that as people move from being an employee to being self-employed, it's really important that they are aware of the different types of insurance that they need, and also that they're aware that not everything is covered automatically. So practice insurance, it's something that I always encourage a registrar to ask as they're moving on to a new practice. Does the practice have a practice insurance policy? Is there an indemnity policy that covers the actions of both the receptionists and the nurses and the admin team? Because that provides you as doctors an extra layer of comfort and cover. So I think that one is a no-brainer to ask the question and just be aware, if it's not there, that it's not there. So when you've got your non-clinical staff perhaps doing things on your behalf, bringing up patients or something, that you give them really, really specific information, basically a script. This is what you can and can't say, because if something goes wrong and there's no practice indemnity policy, they'll be naming the doctor in the lawsuit, regardless of whether or not it was the doctor that stuffed up. So an important one to be aware of. Public liability insurance. We are becoming more litigious. That's just a fact. Our society is going up the way of some other countries, and if you can sue and get a buck out of it, then why wouldn't you? So public liability insurance is not a requirement for a GP, but I would suggest that it's something that every GP should consider. To explain the difference, your professional indemnity insurance will cover you from obviously a medico-legal perspective, but if you've left your bag just inside the door of the consult room and a patient walks in and trips over your bag and breaks their leg, that's got nothing to do with your professional indemnity insurance. That's your public liability insurance. And if you don't have it, you might find that you're out of pocket to a significant amount. So the practice's public liability insurance covers for things that the practice owns or the actions of the staff of the practice. So if the consult bed collapses and the patient gets hurt, then it's the practice's public liability insurance that kicks in then. But as I said, if they fall over the handle of your bag, then it's up to you to be insured or not. Public liability insurance for a sole trader GP is about $500 a year for about a $20 million cover. It's tax deductible, and most of the MDOs provide it now because it's becoming more and more commonly asked for. So just something to make the registrars aware of as they're transitioning, and something to think about for yourself if you haven't. Life insurance, this is one that's a really important one, and most people aren't aware of it. For the majority of employees, we have our life insurance in our super funds. It's cheap, it's easy, you don't have to worry about it. But they changed the rules of the super funds a couple of years ago so that if people weren't contributing to super, the life insurance got cancelled. And the purpose of that was to maintain the balance for people with low super fund balances. But it had some unintended consequences. And often you'll find somebody who's transitioning to being from an employee to a fellow, they might decide to take a couple of years off super and pay down some other loans instead, knowing that they've still got good earning potential in the future. So I always say $10 into your super fund. If that's all you do on the 1st of June every year, it will keep your life insurance active. Total and permanent disability insurance. Once again, these people are going from employees to sole traders. So no work cover and no income protection, no one paying your wages. So really important for all of you that you have looked at your total and permanent disability cover and make sure that it covers your occupation, not any occupation. You've trained for many, many years to be a GP. If you want to put a claim in on your total and permanent disability insurance, you don't want to find out that it's for any occupation and they suggest that you go and collect trolleys at Woolies. So that's one for everybody to check. Make sure that you have checked yours and also encourage your registrars to do the same. And income protection insurance, I would suggest that probably most of you have got it, but understanding the difference between a 1 month wait and a 3 month wait for it to kick in, and the need to have at least that much money to cover you while you are in that waiting period is really important. This one's the big kicker that I know has got some people really excited in the past and some people really, really, really in big strife. So as you move from an employee to being self-employed, the tax office isn't aware that you've changed until you lodge your tax return. So as an employee, your employer legally has to withhold tax from your pay. If you're self-employed, the tax office will ask you for an instalment every quarter. But until you actually lodge your first tax return that shows that you have a debt to the ATO, they don't know to ask you for that. And it can mean a really, really big tax bill to the ATO. And if our new sole traders haven't been budgeting for it, it can really, really hurt. I know of one really, really lovely medical educator, very intelligent, great person, found herself in trouble to the ATO to a 6-figure sum because she wasn't aware of this potential, well, what we call it as a tax holiday. So this is when I say that the most important thing we can suggest to anyone who is moving from an employee to being a sole trader is get yourself a good accountant, one who can go into this in much more detail than what I can, so that they're aware of what these things mean. So this person who I was referring to thought that the difference between earnings between being a registrar and a fellow, oh my goodness, she was raking it in as a fellow. Couldn't believe the difference in her income because she wasn't taking into account the fact that she still had a tax bill to pay. So when her income tax return was lodged, and it was lodged, in May the following year because she had an accountant, so she got the deferral. The ATO didn't want the tax just for the previous year. They wanted all the instalments for the current year as well. And it really impacted not only on her cash flow, but on her professional opinion of herself. It was really, I think, quite a distressing time, as she felt like she should have known this, and how could she have been so silly, and why didn't she figure it out? But you guys have trained as doctors, not as accountants. So really important that we encourage the registrars to get a good accountant as they're transitioning into sole traders. And what I always suggest is that potentially, if we go back a couple of slides where I said, $100 item 23, $40 service fee, left with $60. If a GP is consulting, say, 46 weeks of the year, 7 sessions a week, that's what I would consider a full-timer, 40% of that $60 needs to go somewhere to pay your tax bill. And I always suggest get an offset account if you've got a mortgage, or a term deposit account. Just put it away where you can't see it, but don't spend it. In relation to the insurance, total and permanent disability, income protection, all those sorts of things, get an insurance broker to explore all the options for you. There's so much out there. None of us has got the time, energy, or probably the inclination to get all of the different options there. But a good insurance broker is just worth their weight in gold. And if you do need to make a claim, they do all the work for you. So that's a win-win. This is something that a lot of newly fellow GPs put their hands up and say, no way. But I'm quite astounded at the number of new fellows who say, yep, I want to own my own practice. Yep, I want to get in there. Yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to smash it out. How do I do it? I always suggest when this question's raised, how do I do it? Find out why they want to be a business owner, and then direct the answer from there. So some people really want the challenge of greenfield site, build it from scratch. I would always suggest to them, or unless you've got someone in the management side of things who knows what they're doing, you might be biting off more than you can chew. And suggest that if somebody does want to be a business owner in a general practice, they want to, say, buy in to an established practice, letting them know what they need to do in the lead up to show that they are a potential candidate is really important. So, I don't only look at leadership qualities. I want somebody who, and I'm saying this, I don't have a say in our practice ownership at all. I'm not an owner. But if my opinion's asked, I say, we want people who are solution-based rather than pointing out the problems. If you're going to be working with somebody and sharing financial commitments with them for the next 20 or 30 years, you want to know that they're not just going to be a finger pointer, but they're going to get in and into the trenches and do the dirty work with you. And if that means loading up the contents of the fridges into eskies when you've got a cold chain breach and transporting them to another facility, then that's what you do. If that means that you have to go in at 3 o'clock in the morning because someone's thrown a brick through the window, then that's what you do. But there's so much I can see that's valuable in being a business owner in general practice, specifically the ability to be able to embrace other challenges whilst still doing what you've trained to do. So, you could be the HR person, you could be the IT person, you could be the risk person, all while still doing what it is that you love and what you've trained for years to do. Big financial responsibilities, so something that they would need to consider. And as a benchmark, I often get asked how much does it cost to buy into a practice. From a financial perspective, generally 3 to 5 times whatever it is the annual profit that's expected to come. So, if you're buying a $10,000 profit share for a year, you could be paying between $30,000 and $50,000 to buy that. That's the norm, that's the benchmark. Best return on investment you can get if the profits remain stable or grow. So this is my to-do list for all of our about to fellow or newly fellow GPs, or anyone who is moving from being employed to being self-employed. Get an accountant, please encourage them to get accountants. I talk about outsourcing, and doing your own tax return, doing your own BAS is really easy. We know that it's A minus B equals C, not difficult. But I say I can clean the toilet too, but I really don't want to. Focus on the things that you're good at and that you've trained for, and let somebody else do the rest of it. It's really important that they have an accountant that they can speak to and discuss all of their future professional and personal options with. John said that going into business with somebody is like getting married. You need to be able to tell your accountant if the person that you're in a life relationship with at the moment is your long-term partner or not, because that'll change the way they structure things. It is really important that people transitioning to self-employed understand that they won't get loans, they won't get credit cards, they won't get loans until they've got at least 1, but probably 2 years worth of BAS behind them. So very, very important that they understand getting pre-approval for loans is really important. ABNs in their legal name, not their trading name. So my maiden name was Noisette. If I was trading in my maiden name, it would be Leonie Chamberlain trading as Leonie Noisette. Really important, because the merchants and the banks won't give you a merchant facility if your ABN is not in your legal name. Open up a bank account for the professional use only. If there is any of you out there who are still paying for expenses using your personal credit cards so that you can get higher points or something like that, please stop it. You're spending so much time going through those credit card statements at the end of the year to look for something. You're bound to miss a big deduction and the points aren't worth it. So a bank account that's totally for professional use is my suggestion, and opening up a bank account for tax payments so that you've got that money put away, or they've got that money put away, and offset it against any mortgage or loans. And that is the end of my rambling.
I'm not sure that it was rambling, Leonie. I've certainly, as a never business owner, learned a lot. And I guess I would just add to what you've said in terms of context. As a medical educator with the RSCGP, certainly in my experience over some decades, I know it's limited to my small patch, but I do think registrars are not well equipped with this stuff. It might be an argument that medical educators and the RSCGP should do more, and ACRM indeed as colleges, but it does fall to supervisors to equip their registrars to manage this right now and probably always. So the sorts of things you've covered are, really important and actually meet a need. The registrars are not getting this elsewhere.
I think it's really interesting that it is included in some of the curriculums. It just depends on the region.
It does, and yet I think some of it's quite necessarily brief and in general, but I think what you've spoken to is some really important points.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any one size fits all. I think that asking these sorts of questions on the GPSA community, there's great resources there. The practice managers are really good at sharing information and asking questions and sharing their knowledge. Not being a supervisor, I don't get into the supervisor chat, but I would suggest that, that's probably just as a collegiate environment for people to be asking questions or saying, hey, how did you teach this? But getting your practice managers to, if you don't know the answer to something or you'd like something explored a little bit more, ask your practice manager to ask it on the practice managers community platform, because we are a very, very active little group and lots of information sharing happens there. And because it's a closed group, it's a pretty safe environment to be asking questions and sharing information that you certainly wouldn't share on some other platforms.
Thanks all. See you again soon. Thanks, Leonie. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for watching. We'd love your feedback. Please comment or subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates on new videos. If you'd like to ask a question or suggest a topic, you can contact us via our website at gpsa.org.au. GP Supervision Australia is supported by funding from the Australian Government under the Australian General Practice Training Program.